Welcome to the selection show for 2009 Mission Madness presented by NASA Edge.
What we've done here is put together a competition based on March Madness, but instead using NASA missions in competition.
That's right, Blair. We have actually 64 missions, past, present, and future, broken up into 4 regions to see who's the greatest mission of all time.
And those 4 regions, or in this case themes, are exploration, space ops, aeronautics, and science.
Voting will begin March 19th through the 20th. So, beginning with the Nebula Division, the high-altitude airborne science aircraft ER-2 versus Apollo 11. Mars Phoenix versus XV-15, where tilt-rotor technology was developed. The Far Ultraviolet Spectroscopic Explorer versus the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. Terra versus the Hubble Space Telescope. Freedom 7 versus STS-114, the 2005 return-to-flight mission. The STS-26 returned to flight in 1988 against the Wilkeson Microwave Anisotropy Probe. Friendship 7 versus SR-71, and the Solar Terrestrial Relations Observatory, or STEREO, versus the Mars Pathfinder. And what do you guys see in terms of matchups in this first division?
This region's stacked, I think, compared to the other 3 regions. And what I see potential in the second round is an Apollo 11 Phoenix matchup with a heavy hitter going in the Sweet 16 between Apollo 11 and Hubble.
I'm looking at the Mars Phoenix and the XV-15 tilt rotor technology, and Friendship 7 against the SR-71. I think those will be key matchups.
I will say that one thing too, though, this is going to be based on people's votes. So
That's
it's
right.
not what we feel; it's what we think the public will think. And I think that what's interesting about this first round is you have 2 significant Mars missions going up against other missions. And it's really going to determine whether or not how Mars is going to fare in the whole tournament.
That's true. In the stellar region, starting off, we have the Super Pressure Balloon going up against the Mars rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. We have the F-8 digital fly-by-wire technology going up against Mars Odyssey. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, or MRO, going up against Lunar Crater Observation and Sensing Satellite, LCROSS. We have the KC-135A looking at winglet technology going up against Expedition 1, the first resident crew on station. X-29 going up against Clementine. AD-1, or the Oblique Wing, going up against STS-8, the first African-American to go into space, Guy Bluford, who's a fellow Penn State graduate. Orion, going up against STS-88, where we had Unity and Zara connected up in low Earth orbit. And finally, Apollo 13, made a movie out of it. Apollo 13 going up against the X-48, which is the blended wing body.
A lot of good matchups here. I think something that's very special there is Apollo 13 because of the mission itself and what took place to get the crew back here to Earth, going up against an untested X-48. We have people out here looking into the future. They might look at X-48 as being something that NASA needs for the future. So we'll have some old and new going up against one another there. I think that's my number 1 key matchup in the stellar region.
I just think it's interesting. I think STS-8, my goal for them is to do better than Penn State actually does in the basketball tournament. So
wow.
I think that's kind of a key matchup too.
Well, I see a couple key features. A potential Orion Apollo 13 matchup in the second round, where you could actually have the new spacecraft of Orion competing against the old Apollo spacecraft, and does old school beat new school? That's one matchup to look at. And finally, at the very top, we have the Mars rovers potentially going up against Mars Odyssey in the second round. 2 classic Mars missions going up against each other head to head.
Again, I think, very early on, we're going to find out where people fall on this, and whether they're big history buffs, whether they like the tradition, or whether they're really excited about some of these things that are untested.
In the Galaxy region, we'll have the Galaxy Evolution Explorer going up against Viking 1 and 2. The F-8 Super Critical Wing going up against the Ares 1 launch vehicle. Pioneer 10 will square off against Barrel, or the balloon array for radiation relativistic electron losses.
It gets points for just complexity of name.
That's right.
The Bell X-1 against Themis, or time history of events and macroscale interactions during substorms. Aqua, the water satellite, against Apollo 8, the first man orbit to the moon. STS-7, the first American woman in space, against SOHO, Solar and Heliospheric Observatory. Rounding out, we have Surveyor 1 against STS-93, the first female space shuttle commander, and Helios, the environmental research aircraft and sensor technology, against the original Skylab.
Oh, I like the ring to that. The original Skylab.
The
original ISS.
The original
the
ISS.
ISS before it was a mission.
Yeah.
What kind of matchups do you see in this particular region?
Well, it's interesting. I think one of the most interesting or intriguing to me is the belly flop contest between Helios and Skylab. That's an interesting. Both came down in kind of interesting ways.
I think that Bell X1 Themis matchup I think Bell X1 will take it. What's going to be interesting is in the second round, I see a potential Pioneer 10 Bell X1 matchup where you have the plane that broke the speed of sound against Pioneer 10 that's leaving the solar system. So you're looking at an aeronautics space related theme.
I agree.
And then also Viking 1 and 2 with the potential Ares 1 matchup. We're going to just find out how much support that Ares 1 is going to get versus Viking 1 and 2, which was the first landers that landed on Mars.
It's just hard to go against Vikings because they're so tough.
Yeah, Leif Erikson was a pretty good Viking, wasn't he?
And they pillage.
And Minnesota's a halfway decent team.
Yeah, that's a good
But
point.
one point there, just to talk about STS-93, which people might learn about as they're studying the missions. It was the first female commander in space. However, this was the mission where they tested high definition TV to be used later in the technology that we use today. So they were testing it up in shuttle during that mission.
One thing that we haven't mentioned so far, but will play out, is how spin-offs work in terms of these missions, in terms of how people vote.
Here's the matchups for Horizon. First, we have STS-95, which was the second John Glenn mission, going up against Hyper-X, the X-43, which broke the Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest vehicle. We have Trace going up against Expedition 16, the first female commander to command an expedition mission on ISS. We have the F-15B, which is a fighter jet for the Air Force, but NASA has used it as one of the most versatile test beds around, versus the JWST, which is going to be the James Webb Space Telescope, which has not flown yet. We have NB-52, which is the B-52 going up against Lunar Prospector 1. The X-15, which at the time, back in the 50s and 60s, reached altitudes of 67 miles and broke several altitude records, going up against Cassini-Huygens, satellite that's exploring Saturn. We have the Aura, the mission dedicated to the health of the Earth's atmosphere, going up against Voyager 1 and 2. STS-1, the first shuttle flight, going up against the lifting bodies in general. There was a number of lifting body aircraft. Finally, New Horizons, the mission to Pluto, planet or no planet, versus Gemini 4, which was the first American spacewalk.
Yeah, that should be an interesting lineup. One of the things that jumps out to me is some of the crossover of these missions, and it's interesting. B-52, which actually dropped lifting bodies.
Right.
They may end up going
bombs.
instead of bombs, and they may actually go up in head-to-head competition.
One thing I noticed about the brackets is that there are a lot of, we talk about retrofits. The F-15, the B-2 bomber, which has been...
B-52.
B-52. Yeah. I'm curious to see how the people are going to see whether or not the vehicles are actually relevant to them.
Looking at some of the key matchups here, I see a key matchup. I think, going back to your aeronautic theme, I think in the second round, you're going to see the F-15B going up against the NB-52. And I'd like to see what that matchup's going to be like from there.
It won't be.
Okay, and then also I think a classic second round matchup, which I think is going to be one of the most difficult to determine, is Cassini. I have going up against Voyager 1 and 2. That's going to be a classic matchup there.
You're very presumptuous with some of your picks, but enough about what we think, how these missions are going to play out. We're going to go to a break and then come back and hear from some special guests.
And in fact, after listening to a special guest, I just might change my bracket because they know a heck of a lot more than we do when it comes to these missions.
Well, I guess there are no sheets of integrity in this group.
To make a pick and stick to it.
Oh, I'll give my pick to end the show.
You're watching the 2009 Mission Madness Selection Show,
presented by NASA Edge.
An inside and outside look at all things tournamental.
That was cheesy. We're back at 2009 Mission Madness, presented by NASA Edge. We have three special guests with us today.
Should be fun.
First of all, we have Miles O'Brien, formerly of CNN and World Traveler. We have Keith Cowlings, who is the manager of NASA Watch. And finally, we have Melvin Ferebee, who is the project manager for Lunar Surface Systems here at NASA Langley Research Center. Okay, so we've announced Field of 64. Franklin, Blair, and I had a chance to talk about some key matchups, what we think. You three have been at NASA much longer than we have, and Miles, you've been covering NASA for a long time. So we'll start with you, Keith. What do you see some matchups from the four regions?
Well, one that kind of got me interesting is the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter versus LCROSS. And, of course, MRO is circling around Mars, looking at all kinds of stuff close up. But LCROSS is about to slam into the moon. And while they're two different spacecraft, LCROSS is going to have one heck of a incoming pan shot as it slams into the lunar surface. So I think there's some great potential there for the wow factor, if nothing else. New Horizons versus Gemini 4. Now, that may sound like pitting a baseball team and a basketball team together, but Gemini 4, I remember watching kind of the spacewalk back in the old days when Miles and I were young. But New Horizons is kind of interesting because it's moving exceptionally fast through the solar system, heading for Pluto, which is still a planet, by the way. So those are the two that really sort of get my attention.
I thought when that happened you were babysitting Miles.
Neil Tyson on 3 for you, Mr. Cowing.
Okay, Melvin, let's go to you, Melvin. What do you think are some key matchups that you see in the first and second round?
Well, first, in the whole slate of a 64, I can sum this all up in one word: Nebula. The winner of the tournament is going to come out of Nebula. 6 out of my top 8 are all in Nebula. So
Wow.
There are great matchups all through this particular region. I think that it is a travesty to see Apollo 11 against Hubble in the round of 16. Even Friendship 7 versus Mars Pathfinder. Do you look at a guy who, first American in space, who's on the cover of Life magazine versus a little rover that's on the cover of Time.
Do they publish Life magazine anymore?
No, they don't. But I'm just kicking it old school here.
So we got 3 old school people here.
Yeah,
So,
that's interesting.
well, Miles, what do you think?
Well, will the Nebula matches be played in Madison Square Garden? Because I want to see that one. I think those are the good ones. It is a little stacked, I've got to say. That's a tough one. But then I look down at Horizon and I look at, STS-1, which is one of my personal all-time favorites, given the fact that those two guys strapped themselves into a craft that had never been tested before.
John Young and Robert Crippen.
In many ways, one of the gutsiest missions ever when you think about that. Sure, they had crew escape, if you believe that those ejection systems would have not put them right into the rocket plume. You couple that with the Voyager missions, that's kind of an interesting one. But my eye still goes back to Nebula, and I look at, Hubble versus Apollo 11. That's a tough bracket to beat. I suspect the winner, certainly the Final 4 will be very strong coming out of there. The final 2 that come out of there are going to be very interesting.
Well, I'm sensing a trend from you guys. It seems like all the human missions seem to bubble to the top, be the strongest by far over any of the rovers, orbiters, things like that.
Yeah, rovers can't throw touchdowns. Come on.
Hey, how many schools have been named after rovers? And you know what they say, no Buck Rogers, no Bucks.
When I look at my bracket, and this is interesting, I have the Mars rovers going pretty far in this tournament. Look what Spirit and Opportunity has done over the last several years. It was only supposed to last about 3 months, and it's still going strong.
Yeah, but Steve Squires could have done what both of those rovers did in an afternoon.
No, I like Mars rovers in that bracket a lot. Apollo 13 is a tough one on the human side of things, but certainly that wins on the robotic side of things in that bracket.
There are a lot of aeronautics missions in here that you guys haven't even spoke about. Think about the SR-71, X-15, X-43.
Yeah.
Those are pretty impressive feats over the last 40 years.
Yeah, X-15 versus Cassini, that's an interesting one because, it's talk about apples and oranges in many respects, but think of all the science that Cassini has generated, and then think of all the aeronautical design and the envelopes that were pushed with the X-15. That's an interesting one there.
Well, X-15 and Cassini have something else going for them. An X-15 pushed altitude records, and if you recall, when Cassini buzzed Enceladus recently, that was within 100 miles. So you've got one spacecraft going super high and another one going super low over a moon that's hundreds of millions of miles away. So there's actually some sort of strange relationship there.
What are some missions that didn't make the field that you think should have made this field 64?
I am really surprised that Apollo's Soyuz didn't make the cut. That was the official end of the space race. Why it's not here, I have no idea. I don't understand why L-Cross is in this field when it's still in a box on an interstate on its way to the Cape.
Actually, can we confirm that it's in a box in a crate on its way to the
It's
Cape?
being pulled by a monster truck.
That's right.
I sure hope it has a GPS transponder so we know where it is.
Hey, Keith, do you have any surprises in the field?
The one that I'm really kind of looking at here is X-29 versus Clementine. Now, you may say, Well, X-29 was kind of interesting. It had forward swept wings, which was something that emerged from World War II. And although you don't see forward swept wings yet, the way it's paired against Clementine, and Clementine is a mission that everybody seems to have forgotten, but this was the original MacGyver spacecraft. So I think Clementine, we'll find out that Clementine is the precursor for a lot of the ways that NASA's going to go back and do stuff. And I don't want to say faster, better, cheaper. Oops, I just did.
Oh, don't
but
do that.
something like that.
Ouch.
Well, one thing about that, they say X-29 was flown by computer. It had to be because of the way it was built. I say it would have been more successful if it was flown with a Mac operating system as opposed to a Windows operating system.
I absolutely agree.
Wow. No comment from me there.
We'll just throw that one out
Well,
there.
I like the X-43 to go deep into the tournament, maybe even make the Final Four.
Wow.
Well,
It'll certainly knock off John Glenn.
right. Well,
Yeah.
well, speaking of,
No, I think that's correct.
Oh, no, I want to see Buzz Aldrin knock off John Glenn.
let's get to our Final Four selection. Melvin, let's start with you. Who do you have in your Final Four?
Coming out of Nebula, Apollo 11. Coming out of the Galaxy, Apollo 8. Coming out of the Stellar, Apollo 13. Let's not forget failure's not an option. Coming
true.
out of the Horizon, the X-43.
Wow.
Awesome.
Heavily weighted in the Apollo years there, huh?
All right, Miles, who do you think?
I'm going to pick Hubble just to be different on Nebula, although Apollo 11 certainly would be a strong choice. Coming out of Galaxy, I think Apollo 8 I think was the gutsiest of the Apollo missions. So I'm going to put that one there for Galaxy. I think going into Stellar, I'm just a huge fan of those Mars rovers. I'd like to see them win. I just think that's been such a remarkable mission. The fact that they're still going should get a lot of credit. And then, in Horizon, I'm going to really go out there and just to be, so I'm not accused of favoring the man side of things, Voyager 1 and 2.
Very interesting.
Very
nice,
good.
Nice, good call.
All right.
Keith, what about you?
I'm going to go with my gut. Absolutely go with my gut and how people will vote. I think it's going to be Apollo 11. I really think that a lot more people know what Bell X-1 was, that beautiful orange rocket plane. I think it's got a shot. I think that Expedition 1 in the International Space Station is going to give a run for its money to Apollo 13, but I think Apollo 13 will come out in Stellar. And, Horizon's a real hard one. I would say that Cassini is probably going to edge that out because it's done a lot of really cool stuff of late.
And as we said, the public's going to be voting for this, and it's going to be left up to them. And for the viewers out there, please take their suggestions to heart because these are three experts: Melvin, Miles, and Keith. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing who the winner's going to be.
Yes, absolutely.
And remember, no wagering, please.
Absolutely fabulous and getting some good feedback from everybody, but we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're actually going to get some fan reaction to the brackets as well, see how they respond to this lineup of 64 teams.
And then
missions.
And at the end of the selection show, we're going to announce our Final Four.
Absolutely.
And
With
we'll
some surprises.
Yeah, we'll see who has their finger on the pulse of what's happening at NASA.
That's right.
Hey, you're watching the selection show for 2009 Mission Madness.
Brought to you by NASA Edge.
Welcome back to the selection show for 2009 Mission Madness.
But now we want to take a look and see what our some of our Facebook friends have to say about this lineup.
On the line, we have Don and Becky. Hello.
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 And now we want to hear what you guys think in terms of the brackets. Don, let's start with you. What are some key matchups you see in this tournament?
Well, it's kind of interesting. If you look in the Stellar bracket, I mean, you've got the Mars exploration program kind of in a mini elimination tournament starting out. I mean, you got MRO and Odyssey and the Rovers kind of going at it in the early rounds, so that's going to be interesting to see who, makes it all the way to the Elite Eight. Over in the Nebula bracket, it's kind of interesting, too. You've got Apollo 11, potentially, if they can make it through some early matchups up against Hubble.
It's interesting. You mentioned the Mars mini round over in Stellar because there's actually one forming in Nebula, too. You've got the Phoenix versus the Pathfinder.
Ah, true.
Becky, what about you?
I am a Mars fan. I think Mars is exciting. I think the public enjoys it. I've got to stick with the Phoenix, and I've got to stick with the Pathfinder. If I go down to Galaxy, Viking, you can't argue with Viking. Its history is huge.
Actually, you can argue with Viking.
You cannot argue with Viking.
I stand corrected.
Apollo 8, what more do I need to say? But I still think Viking will overtake the Apollo 8 crowd.
Wow.
If I go over to Stellar, I am a Rover fan. got our money's worth out of the Rovers, but I have to say, I think it's going to be a huge competition in the stellar region between Rover and Orion, because, Orion is our next generation spaceship.
That's a good point.
If I go down to Horizon, here I am picking an underdog. I would love to see Pluto put back into the planetary system.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I think New Horizon, I predict, will go up against NB52, which is also cool in its own right. But I have to give it to the New Horizon because I'd love to see the underdog come out.
She has Orion beating Apollo 13, which won an Academy Award, I believe, starring Tom Hanks. Don, what do you think about that?
That's going to be a real interesting angle because, Apollo 13 clearly is going to be a sentimental favorite, but, ultimately the mission was a failure. And Orion at this point is in that class of mission, which we've got a few here that haven't actually flown yet. So how those are treated, by the fans when they're looking at, who moves on, it's really not clear at this point. I think Apollo 13 is going to be a tough one, though. She's a big fan of New Horizons, but I think there's a really good matchup in the second round between Cassini and Voyager.
Yeah, we talked about that in the last segment.
Yeah, the Grand Tour against the current Saturn mission, and the winner of that one's going to be tough to beat. New Horizons is an exciting mission, but that's going to be a real interesting, the way that shakes out through the Sweet 16.
How did you guys figure on the Battle of the Belly Flops with Helios and Skylab?
Well, one was intended and the other one wasn't, so I think there's a little bit of an advantage there.
Well, you still have to rate the entry. That's,
You all don't see anything in these brackets for the aeronautics side of the house?
I did go with the NB52.
Yeah, B-52.
Yeah,
it's B-52 out of Dryden. The other one I like is the SR-71. I think the Blackbird may go far. It's got some tough Apollo competition there and some Mercury competition, but I think they got a good shot.
Right, I agree.
Well, it is the Blackbird.
Let's get a winner. Becky, I'll start with you. Who do you think is going to take this tournament?
Well, Chris, I think we need new, forward-looking exploration and missions, and I'm going to have to stick with Orion.
Oh, thank goodness. She went with a manned mission. I feel better.
That's true. Mm-hmm. Don, what about you?
Well, it's kind of a coin flip in the final. I've got the Rovers up against Hubble, and I just really don't know which way to go on that one. I'd probably go with the Rovers sentimentally, but...
Oh, man, interesting.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I was going to wait to the final segment as we talk about our final four. I actually have Mars, Rover, and Hubble as the final two in my bracket.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So... looks like we're right on there. Hey, well, guys, thank you so much. Make sure you get to the website, you vote as many times as you like, and we'll talk more about that when we come back from break.
Again, we're getting a lot of interesting feedback from folks. So when we come back from the break, we're going to announce our final four. And Franklin, you've mentioned Arrow.
I think Arrow is a sleeper here. I think it's not been getting a lot of love, but I grew up on airplanes and the right stuff. And the Bell X-1, and then you have the Apollo missions. But look forward to aeronautics coming through. You're
going to be surprised when we select our mention our final four and we come back from break. I'm right there with you, buddy.
I might have some Arrow love to share with others because I'm a sharing kind of guy.
All right.
All right. You're watching the 2009 Mission Madness Selection Show.
Presented to you by NASA Edge.
I'm telling you, it could be interesting.
It could be very
Arrow
interesting.
all the way.
Good.
Welcome back to the 2009 Mission Madness Selection Show.
Brought to you by NASA Edge.
Hey guys, real quick before we get into our final four picks, I honestly believe that Chandra and Spitzer are two missions that were left out of the field of 64 that should have been in there.
Great observatories.
And great observatories. We talked about them on past shows, so maybe in 2010 they'll get back in.
Yeah, and Chandra gets a little nod in STS-93, but...
There's tons of missions out there. It was a difficult process for the selection committee to come up with the field of 64. Like you said, there's always next year, so maybe they'll make the cut.
For us, man, coming down to my final four is pretty hard.
Yes.
And I'm going to give it to you right now. Coming out of the Nebula region, I picked Apollo 11.
Good choice, yeah.
Going up against Ares 1. You have some of the old and some of the brand new. Brand new going against each other.
Classic matchup.
In that Final Four matchup. And out of the Stellar region, I have the Rovers. And out of Horizon, I have the HyperX X-43.
Nice. Arrow.
Yeah, nice.
Very good.
That's a darn good selection, sir. I have Hubble coming out of Nebula.
Yes.
Hubble, Apollo 11, it's a toss-up at that point. Galaxy, I have Bell X-1. I mean, I just think Bell X1 started off in the aeronautics for supersonic
The
flight.
right stuff.
I like that.
That's right, Chuck Yeager. Stellar region, I got Mars rovers. I have to agree with Miles. I've always loved the Mars rover missions. I think they've done a great job over the last 5 years.
And still kicking.
It's still kicking, that's right. True. And finally, out of the Horizon region, this was probably my toughest region, but I selected the Cassini-Huygens mission due to the fact that it was a double combo where you had the Cassini satellite and also the Huygens probe that landed on Titan. So
Okay, so for my final four, I also had from the Stellar region Mars rovers. Obvious
Good
reasons. For Horizon, I had a unique pick to everyone, STS-1. It's a sentimental favorite of mine and very important,
it's a
obviously.
good pick. I mean, I'll buy that.
And I actually agreed with you, Franklin, with Ares 1. It was a toss-up between Bell X, but Ares 1 I think is important. And now, my out of Nebula.
Tough region.
Yes, my Arrow pick, which is actually has spawned the greatest NASA spinoff ever. The U2 and the ER2. The ER2 mission is my pick.
That's crazy talk, man.
No, because it's
What's the spinoff, though?
the Irish rock band U2. So actually, NASA is responsible for some of the greatest music we've had over the past 20 years. And I'll go further. If ER2 wins, U2 is going to play on NASA Edge.
Yeah, right.
And in fact, the Edge of U2 will play on NASA Edge. It's just perfect.
Wow.
Yeah. How far did you dig for that?
That's common knowledge.
Who'd you have for the winner?
Apollo 11.
That's a safe choice. That's a very good choice.
Wow, that's a solid choice.
It is. And I had Mars rovers.
Neither one sang at the inauguration.
You've got the Field of 64 announced. You've heard it from the experts and from some Facebook friends.
Yes.
Now it's your time to vote. Voting starts March 19th. You actually can go to the website now, download the brackets in PDF format, or look at it online.
Yep.
We've got placards that give the summaries and some fun facts and photos of each of the missions, so you can learn all about the 64 different missions that are out there. And we look forward to seeing the greatest mission of 2009.
So for folks out there like Michael at ATK, when he's in the cafeteria watching NASA Edge, it'll be a good reminder to go and vote.
Hey, you're watching the 2009 Mission Madness Selection Show.
Brought to you by NASA Edge.
And sponsored by rock group U2. I guarantee I can get them here.
Crazy talk.
I can get them here.
No.
If they vote, they'll be here. Me and Bono.